Hi everyone, I'm Evie. You're watching Perpetually Paperback, and today I'm going to be doing my late summer reading wrap-up. Okay, so some of the books I'm going to talk about today are ones that I've talked about in other videos, so I'm just going to mention them very briefly and probably link to those videos in one of the corners. I'm going to start with Monalisa Ojeda's Las Beauty Queens. This is it's actually a very small, like 150 pager. It's kind of short stories about trans Latinx people in New York. It was absolutely fantastic. If there is a single book that I recommend on this entire list, this is probably it. It was touching, it was beautiful, it was gritty. It really showed a level of camaraderie and found family in New York for these trans individuals. This was honestly probably one of the best things I've read in the last couple months. I absolutely recommend this. This was awesome queer lit. It was very, very good. You can actually check on YouTube. I'll see if I can link that video as well. Ivan is reading parts of the story as well. It was a nice full circle. It actually is fiction, but it reads in ways like nonfiction. As you're going through these stories, it feels like you're reading a memoir. In some ways, it's very touching and very beautiful. Next, I read The Trouble with Peace by Joe Abercrombie. It is book 2 in the Age of Madness series. I'm not gonna lie, I was not a big fan of this one, pretty much at all. The first book I thought was really fantastic. They feel very formulaic at this point. This pretty much is following, I can't really give a full plot description on this one because the plot isn't, this one had more plot than the first, but basically we're following a set of characters. So it's the same people that we're following in book 1. We have Orso, Savine, Leo Dambrock, Rika, and some of the older people from the first set of books. And I think The Wizard's First Law. No, that's not the right book series. Anyway, in Joe Abercrombie's first set of 3 books, this is kind of a continuation like 30 years later. In this one, we kind of have a plot to overthrow the king, which in some ways should be more interesting, but I found this one to be a little bit slow, a little bit boring. Character development, great. Joe Abercrombie is a good writer, so in that sense, it kind of helped a little bit, but in general, I don't know that I would recommend that one. I'm on the 3rd one now, so we'll see. Hopefully the series gets a little bit better. It does, however, lead me to want to read more Abercrombie, and some of the ones that I've heard are much better. Moving on, I actually had a really great reading couple months in this one. Then I read The Inheritance of Orquidea Divina by Zoraida Cordova. I loved this. If I were to ever write a book, it would be like this. It was full of magical realism. It was like a very softcore fantasy, I would say. It was one of my book of the month picks, which is kind of weird because I don't usually I almost never pick fantasy for my book of the month. I almost always pick like literary fiction or something like that. I don't know why. This was just so good. The first 100 pages or so were a little bit slow paced. In this one, we're following Marimar and a couple of different people in her family. They are summoned by their grandmother, Orquidea, back to their home so that they can collect their inheritance. And we start to get a lot more magic in this one as the story progresses. So the first couple 100 pages, it is set in the real world. We don't necessarily get too much, but the way that they talk about it is that everyone in the family just knows it's there, kind of ignores it. So that's kind of why I say it's a little bit more magical realism than it is fantasy per se, but it strongly gets into fantasy towards the end of the book. I don't want to give away a whole lot in this one. It is a roller coaster towards the end. Basically, the family starts to find out more and more about their matriarch and things that lead them to understand parts of themselves and all the gifts that their grandmother gives them as she passes into another life. Her passing into another life is that she becomes a tree. They watch her turn into a tree. I I thought it was very clever. I thought there were certain things in the fantasy, like a lot of the fantasy I read tends to be somewhat of the same, like you start to see the same sort of things. I loved it. At one point they have to go, it's in some ways global. They have to travel back to their home in Ecuador, and it's a beautiful homage to Ecuador and family, I thought. So if this is something that you've heard of and are considering checking it out, I strongly recommend this one, especially if you like fantasy, especially if you like magical realism. After that, I read The Book of Eels by Patrik Svensson, and I'm going to put the book title up here because it's actually really long. This was a nonfiction book about eels. I heard this on audio. I would say on this one, like, it wasn't my favorite. If this is something that you like, if you like naturalist or environmental literature, this one's, it's interesting. It reads more like a memoir of fishing between him and his father. So the author alludes to these experiences that he had with his father and relates them back to the study of eels and what we know about humanity through eels. It was interesting. It was short. If it was a little bit longer, I don't know that I would have been super into it. For me, this was kind of a 3-star. It was middle of the road. If this is the kind of nonfiction that you like, definitely check it out. If you're on the fence about it, maybe I would skip this one. After that, I read some of the books that I talked about in my 5 fall thrillers video, which I'll link in the corner. I read The Night Swim by Megan Golden and The Lost Village by Camilla Sten, Razorblade Tears by S.A. Crosby. I liked all of them. I would recommend all of them. I think they're all really great thrillers for fall. I'm not going to say much more than that, aside of check them out in the video if those are some books that you're interested in hearing about. After that, I had a super highly anticipated release, and it was Evie Dunmore's Portrait of a Scotsman. This is the 3rd book in the League of Extraordinary Women. This one follows Hattie and Lucian. This one is set in Scotland, partially in Scotland. Lucian has roots in... Actually, are they in Scotland or in Wales? No, I'm pretty sure they're in Scotland. But anyway, Hattie is one of the girls in the group that whose family is from wealth. Her father is one of the peers, or part of the peerage, and she has always known that she was going to have like a society marriage. She just didn't think it would happen in the way that it did. She is most definitely a suffragette and realizes exactly how much she didn't know about it through the course of this book and through the course of her marriage to Lucian, basically. This one, all of Evie's books are a little bit of a slow burn. This one I would actually say was probably, aside of the first one with Annabelle and Montgomery, this was probably my favorite. I really like travel stories, and so it's Hattie and Lucian as they're going to, he kind of takes her over, like he discovers a plot by a friend that she is going to run away from him after their marriage situation. They got married. It was a society marriage. Basically, he paid for her. In some ways, he kind of knew that he knew he wanted her outside of just a society marriage. But pretty much, she's like, I'm not doing this. And through the connections that she has, finds a way to escape the marriage. Lucian heads her off and takes her to Scotland in what he feels is a trip that's going to help them come together in their marriage. Basically, he says it's for them. Hattie is so against this. She's against any loss of independence. But as they're on this journey, they end up discovering a lot about themselves. I thought it was very sweet. This one has, honestly, a bittersweet ending. It wasn't, I guess, the way that you would want. It's not the way that usual romances are done. It has an interesting ending. Maybe personally for me, I could have done without it, but it was very cute. And everything, I thought this was great. So I would say the first one in this series would be my number 1. This would be my number 2. The middle one would be my number 3, just because it was such a slow burn. This one's somewhere in between the first and the second, as far as slow burn goes, in the sense of, obviously it is a romance and you are going to get some smutty scenes. This one satisfied that a little bit more than the middle one. The middle one, it was like a very slow burn. I enjoyed the character in this one. I enjoyed what Hattie learned about herself. And in all of Evie's books, I would say it's a very much historical romance. There is a lot of historical fiction that comes out. She tells a lot about the time in history, or she gives a lot of history about suffragettes and how women in that time and in those spheres of society had to survive. So if you like that, check this one out. If you're not sure about the romance genre but do like historical fiction, I think Evie Dunmore is a really good author to start with. Hers are very historically based. There's a lot of meat to them and a good character development. She's a great writer. Not that the other historical writers are bad or that smutty scenes are bad. Evie's writing style is just a little different in a really good way. Moving on to another super highly anticipated release. October was a very big month for releases, and I actually got through them. What? I know. Anyway, now we are moving on to Silvia Moreno-Garcia's Velvet Was the Night. She is an author that I found I've really enjoyed. I think she may be one of my favorites. I read a couple of hers before. Mexican Gothic was fantastic. I loved Gods of Jade and Shadow. This one was very different, but one of the things I'm really liking about her is that so far all the books I've read of her completely shift in genre. I think she's a very talented writer. The writing style is very good. The writing style I think is just fantastic in her books. This book is a psychological noir set in the early 19th, so like 69, 71 in Mexico City. It actually centers around an event that took place in real life. In the 60s in Mexico City, there was a lot of fear of communism. And so at the time, the government was trying to quell these communist disruptors, right? So what they did is they created this group called the Hawks, and they were meant to seek out communist dissenters within the student population. Mexico City has UNAM, which is their university there, and they've always been pretty politically, like the students have been very politically charged, especially in Mexico City in the 60s. They have a really rich history and it's very interesting. So if that's something that you like or don't know anything about, this is a really great book for that. The only caveat I will say to this one is it is very much within the noir genre. So if that is not something that you're into, maybe think about it before diving into this one. The reason I say is you have all of the heroes are anti-heroes. No one is aggressively likable. If anything, every character is kind of unlikable. The two characters that we are following, I don't know what all this fluff is in the middle of my face, but if you see it, I'm sorry, and my flailing hand motions are that. But anyway, going back to Velvet Was the Night, in this book we follow Maite and Elvis. I heard someone say the name Matey, but like, I am someone that, because I speak Spanish, I read all the names in Spanish. Also for all of the other languages that I read as well, like oftentimes I'll read Swedish ones and read them in Spanish, like the names in Spanish, like it doesn't make any sense. Anyway, this one we follow Maite. She is a legal secretary and she's pretty disillusioned with her life. She would rather fantasize about the lives that she reads in her comic books that are these like, I think they're like the equivalent of like Harlequin romances, but in comic book form, like periodical form, or like Penny Dreadful kind of, but not, like these are very romance specific, right? So she envisions these like grand lives that she doesn't lead and kind of wants her life to be more interesting. So at one point, her neighbor from across the way, Leonora, asks her if she can watch her cat while she's out on this trip for a few days. She agrees to it because she likes the idea of Leonora's life and wants to see if she can kind of insert herself into that. A couple days go by, Leonora does not show up again, and so she begins to look for her through anyone that she can that's connected to her. And in this way, she sort of inserts herself into something bigger than what she ever thought. At the same time, we have Elvis, who is part of one of the Hawks, and he takes direction from El Mago. The direct translation for El Mago is like the wizard. So he is the leader. That's how he knows him. He's never referred to by name as far as we know. So these two entities are essentially both trying to work to find Leonora. The Hawks for different reasons. They were part of this riot that took place with all the students, and so they both entities have the government looking for them. So we have these three people that are involved in the search for Leonora. As we're trying to find out, in this search for her, we're also looking for a set of pictures that she may have had of the event that could be incriminating to someone. We don't really know who. We actually don't know what's in the pictures, if they could be incriminating, or who they are incriminating, right? So we have Maite, who's over here with some friends of Leonora that, like I said, she inserts herself into her life to try and find her, because she really just doesn't want to keep her cat or to be responsible. And really Maite's whole prerogative for kind of doing any of this is because her car has been at the body shop and she needs a little bit of extra money to get her car. So that's really her main reason for doing any of this. But in so doing, she meets some people and she'd be interested to, she meets some people and sees that her life might be more interesting if they remain in her life. Elvis is his own sort of problem. He's kind of from the, I don't want to say underbelly of Mexico City because it's not the underbelly. He's from like a very poor town. He sort of abandoned his family, is kind of making his own way. His found family, as he's decided, is the Hawks, but that's sort of crumbling around him. And as it's crumbling, he begins to kind of question his own life and what he's doing in it. This one had a lot of layers. I would say it was a very slow burn, and like I said before, the only caveat to this one is if you're not into noir, this one may not be for you. If you do like noir, this was a really cool one that fit the genre. It's also something that you don't, I mean, I guess I don't read very many noir thrillers or of it at all, I would say. I've read some. In general, they're not my favorite. I ended up liking this book at the end, and it isn't very long, so it does read fairly quickly. The more I think about it now, after having read it, the more I like it. But initially, this wasn't my favorite, and it's probably my least favorite of hers that I've read. I would still say 3.5 stars. And yeah, this is going to be for some people. Some people are really going to like this. Some people are not going to enjoy this at all. If you're interested about the history of Mexico City, I'd say check this one out. It's pretty cool. I saw a video that she did where she was talking about it, with the author was talking about it, and apparently Mexico has a pretty big history of noir thrillers. So it was kind of something that was pretty cool. Also, I just think it's really cool when Latin authors go back to their roots, and those are some of the things I like the most, like with this one, Zoraida Cordova, with the inheritance of Orquidea Divina. I think those are some things I really, really like. Finally, I ended the month on another nonfiction. This was actually one that I've started, or that I read at the beginning of last year, but I started reading this one right at the time that we went into, like, it was the first, like, as, the pandemic was happening, we first were going into quarantine, and it was like everyone wasn't really sure what was happening. It was like at the time when everyone was freaking out. I didn't really want to read a book this heavy, even though I was like a good probably third of the way through it. It is Missoula, Rape and the Justice System in a College Town by Jon Krakauer. Jon Krakauer is one of my absolute favorite nonfiction writers. I think he is stunning. If you have not read Into Thin Air, do yourself a favor, read it. It's fantastic. He's an investigative journalist, and his nonfiction is so well researched and very comprehensive. He also manages to lay the story out in a way that it presents the facts but also draws at your heartstrings. It's very different from Into Thin Air for obvious reasons. This story follows, it was actually a highly publicized case. I remember it a couple years back, but it was some rape allegations that came out of the University of Missoula. This book uses that as a case study. However, it's more than, it does, I wouldn't necessarily say, like, yes, in some ways it does target Missoula because of the circumstances that surrounded the events that took place. However, he draws on that example to talk about the greater issue at hand, and it's more just talking about rape in college towns and the college system and how universities look at it versus the experience that students themselves have with both. I mean, and he kind of goes over a little bit of everything. Like, it was horrifying. It was horrifying and disgusting, but the things that I found most horrifying weren't necessarily the rapes that took place. It was the conceived notions that people had about it. It was the way that it kind of reminded me of Know My Name by Chanel Miller, in the sense of, like, it's easy for society to place blame on certain things. And regardless of the blame, it's the way that, it's the culture that surrounds, I don't know, I guess partying college. At one point, I think the most horrifying thing in the entire book was that there was a study that was done, and in that study, it was horrifying how many rapes actually took place without anyone calling it that or realizing that that's exactly what it was, and just being callous in a way that says that this is a norm, and that is horribly frightening. I mean, honestly, even just reading it, thinking, like, you know, college parties that I've been to and stuff, and just, I wouldn't even necessarily say that I mean, I don't know, I guess in comparison, I wouldn't necessarily say I was a huge partier, but even just the events that I went to and the things that I saw, it's so easy how a situation can escalate in a way that no one anticipates. And I think the most frightening thing about this is that a lot of the things that took place were by people that knew you, or that knew the victims. They were friends, I would say. It was an eye-opening book. It is not for everyone. The subject matter alone was a little bit difficult. It was much, much easier to read through now than it was to read through at the beginning of the pandemic. That was a bad idea. So I'm glad I stopped it and continued it now. I enjoyed it. I mean, as much as one can enjoy like I said, the subject matter was a little bit rough, but as much as anyone can enjoy that, I thought it was well written. I thought it was hugely eye-opening, and there are parts of this book that are never going to leave my mind, ever. I think truly that's what makes a fantastic book. I will do a video talking about some of my favorite nonfiction, and I suspect I'll be talking about that one quite a bit. But that is where I ended my month. So this was a lot to talk about. Let me know if any of these are some that you were thinking of checking out, especially some of those newer ones. And if you read any of them, definitely let me know. Leave a comment on what your thoughts were. Thank you for joining me today, guys. If you like this video or other content like this, definitely make sure to press the subscribe and the little bell so you can get notified anytime a new video comes out. Thanks for being here.